Happiness through curiosity on the Ranveer Show.
I'll just mention the Antarctica because that has a connection with the Ramayana. Right now, Antarctica, not Atlantic. Antarctic is under a very thick sheet of ice. But the geological data shows, and this is a wonderful work of many researchers, but specifically just to name individual person, I would say Charles Hapgood. He taught at MIT, he taught at Harvard College, history. He taught history there. But he was a scientist par excellence and not truly appreciated by the mainstream academic community again. They object to his research, but they cannot come with an alternative. Okay, so basically it's a vitanda, it's a useless type of discussion. He has shown with a phenomenal research, and I have studied that for many years now, that there was a time when Antarctica was ice-free. Maybe not the entire land, but parts of Antarctica were ice-free. To the extent there were possibly human habitation or definitely rivers flowing and vegetation. Lo and behold, that Piri Reis maps I mentioned in the previous episode, the Turkish admiral, the Navy guy, when he shows that landmass called Antarctica, like Antarctica, which fits the right location, that map, Piri Reis map, is shown with river channels on Antarctica. Now, isn't that fascinating? Because as far as the mainstream academia is concerned, the Antarctica is covered with ice for thousands and thousands of years, but that is not so. Now, what is the relationship to Ramayana? Ramayana describes that actually Ravana, this is in the Uttarakanda, the 7th canto of Valmiki Ramayana. Ravan is going around the world conquering all lands, and he goes to, there is a description, he goes to Yamapuri, and the Antarctica, the southern tip is the Yamapuri, Yama, the land of Yama. That's why we consider the southern direction as the direction of a Yama. Yama is the one who supposedly takes our atmas, afterwards once we die. That's the, religious point of view. So actually there is a description in Uttarakhand. He goes to Yamapuri, then he reconciles with Yama, and from there he goes to Patala. Now, if you put the geography together, you can very easily see India going to Antarctica. And if you just go on the other side, do you know where you go? You go to Argentina. I have been to Patagonia, both on the Chilean side and also Argentinian side. In fact, geologically, you can see in the past, those land masses were connected. Now there is a water because of sea level rising. So that's the point on Atlantis. So Atlantis has not been found, but Atlantis research pulled out these wonderful gems. That's the benefit of it.
I mean, in my 7th grade geography class, I learned that the North Pole and the South Pole and the region surrounding it are cold because of the lack of the sun's heat basically reaching those two parts of the earth because of the tilt of the axis. So kind of the physics fan in me is questioning how they were ice free.
Great question. Two answers, and I'm simplifying it.
Sure.
The first answer is where the ice is formed is a somewhat complex phenomenon. It's just not purely related to how much sun rays goes or how far it is from the equator. It's somewhat complex. It is a mixture of too many factors going into it. But broadly speaking, what you said is correct. As you go away from the equator, there is more colder places. The second one is beyond the tectonic shift, which is the work of Wagner, like about 100 years ago. And he was basically rejected, ignored by the mainstream academia in 1930s. He could not see the success of his great theory in his lifetime.
What was his theory?
Wagner, the tectonic plates, shifting of a tectonic plates. Okay. But there is, so now that finally they accepted tectonic plates, now there is another theory. This is not a new theory. Einstein was fascinated by this theory, I'm going to tell you, and I just briefly mentioned it in the previous episode. It's called Earth crust displacement. Now this is fascinating. So think of this as orange is a good example. So let's say we loosen the skin on the surface of the orange. So orange inside core remains the same. We don't make it move. But the Earth crust, which is about 50 kilometers thick, on an average, so we can move the crust without actually moving the core. Now, be fascinated. Be ready to be fascinated. Now what happens is, suppose my Antarctica is here on the southern side. So inside core remains the same, but because of earth crust displacement, if I shift it little bit, so because the earth core is same, still the south pole is at the same position, but my Antarctica is no longer at the south pole. So Antarctica has shifted. And you can have that. And actually there is evidence. This is the work of Charles Hapgood.
So the South Pole was still as cold as it is today.
Correct.
But the land mass of Antarctica was probably at a different position on the globe.
Very good. And not too far from it, but shifted from where it is today.
Right. It was cold, but not so cold that it's covered in ice because it had a different position. And
Different latitude, right? Now in the south, there is not much land. So it's very difficult to explain. But in the north, it is very easy to explain. In fact, today, the North Pole, the terrestrial North Pole is right in the middle of Arctic Sea. But if you go back about 15,000 years ago, and now you might get a goosebump moment. If you go 15,000 years ago, the North Pole, the terrestrial location of North Pole, there is evidence to show that, and Charles Hapgood work does a great job, was right in the middle of Bay of Hudson, which is, if you look at the Canadian map, like the big ingressing sea kind of thing, that's the Bay of Hudson. Now imagine if the North Pole is in the Bay of Hudson, and we can draw the map if we can. If you open another one and draw the map of North America, I'll show you where the Bay of Hudson is. If there is a North Pole right there, now can you tell me what will happen in the area surrounding it? It will be filled with ice?
Yeah.
Well, that's a North America ice age.
Gotcha.
Okay. And before that, if you go another 15,000 years before, the North Terrestrial Pole was near between Alaska and Canada. There is a place called Yukon Territory in that area. Again, now,
like we've pulled
there
it
you
up.
very good. So right now, think of that where the Canadian border, that light orange color ends. Further there, you know where the pole is, right? Basically, all the lines going together
where
towards
the
zero,
lines would meet,
which is right in the middle of Arctic Sea. Now you see Hudson Bay.
Yes,
and that's where the North Pole was, a terrestrial North Pole, about 15,000 years ago. Bingo. That explains why there was a ice age there. Now what happened once that became icy? So a lot of water is stored on the ground. What that did, basically the Gulf of, the Gulf Stream, the hot water going there, that current was stopped because there was ice right, the Newfoundland area, the eastern part. And therefore now the Western Europe also became frozen because of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream water is no longer going there. And that's why when you go to Ramayana times and even before,
Europe and North America both,
Western Europe, Northern Europe and North America are
covered in ice. Very cold. They were the actual North Pole region.
Correct.
What we count as the Arctic Sea today.
This is based on earth crust displacement. Mainstream academia does not understand it, therefore does not agree with it. But there is a sufficient evidence for it.
So parallelly, like the north of Russia and the Arctic Sea, which is at the north of Russia, must have been habitable.
Yes. And that's what, if you check the work of Graham Hancock or otherwise, the Siberia was like a beautiful place, like a semi-tropical type of thing or lighter tropical. And those are the descriptions we see. Therefore, Sugriva is referring to the time before Ramayana, saying, Sugriva says, I'm aware of this land. And in the Mahabharata, there is no description of that area being bad or something, because, the pole has not seen the effect of it yet. Yeah, so that's fascinating.
What causes the pole shifts? Just tectonic plate movement?
No, the tectonic is the ground plate. Think of it like, there are 7, 8, actually there are more, but these are physical plates. Like India is on a certain plate.
Sure.
That plate came from Africa
all
to
of
here.
Them floating on lava.
Yeah, floating on lava. Japan gets tons of earthquakes because almost, if you see that tectonic plate graph, 7 plates come together in the Japan. So just imagine, they're trying to push each other and it results in just earthquakes and shaking of land in Japan because of that. That's one phenomenon. That is not to be confused with the earth crust displacement, because displacement doesn't change the core. It just moves the piece somewhere there. Whereas tectonic is like India coming away from Africa and meeting Asia. Okay, that's the difference.
Gotcha.
Hey, if you enjoyed this clip from the Ranveer Show, we've uploaded a ton of other clips related to a ton of other topics. So explore the channel because there's something for everyone.